A few weeks back, I mentioned a colleague of mine, the Reverend Judy Wells, who died of cancer recently. I'm friends with her and her husband, Dwayne. There's something about that bond that ministers have who serve in the same area, dealing with kind of similar challenges and successes in ministry. And I felt that Judy's life and ministry needed to be celebrated in that moment. Uh, there was kind of more going on that I wanted to say about her in that service a few weeks back, but I found that when the time came to say it, I got too choked up. Sometimes the emotions that loss stirs up need deeper reflection before comment. What I realized was that what I wrote that Sunday actually fits better today as we celebrate All Saints' Day. One of the functions of All Saints' Day is it's kind of like a catch-all. There's so many saints in the Catholic tradition that you could celebrate someone's feast day every single day if you wanted to. So they kind of lump a bunch of them together and celebrate them all at once. Sort of like if you have a birthday that's a little too close to Christmas and your family says, well, we'll catch your birthday when we do Christmas. It also helped that All Saints' Day is one day after one of the holiest holidays in paganism, which is Christianity's early rival. What we call Halloween is in fact Samhain in the pagan tradition. So All Saints' Day being the day right after is kind of like crashing the party in a sense. Now I'm sure Judy would bristle at my suggestion that she is to be counted among the saints. We typically use that word to mean someone who is perfect or blameless. This is, of course, a little white lie we tell ourselves, right? Everyone born human has faults and a bad day now and again. No, what I mean by the word saint is not someone who is without character flaws. Rather, a saint is someone who is worthy of being emulated. They live or have lived in such a way that we can learn spiritual lessons by studying their life and the choices that they've made. Saints are people whom we call upon, either in prayer or in memory, when we're facing difficult times. Their life and what we've learned about them have something to teach us when we're in trouble or anxious. And by that set of criteria, Judy was a saint. She is worthy of emulation, and my memory of her and her ministry is an example to me and many of my colleagues who knew her. In Unitarian Universalism and other traditions too, but certainly within our own, we talk about what we call a great cloud of witnesses that kind of hangs there right around our shoulder, kind of hovering over us. They are the giants on whose shoulders we stand. They taught us all they could in their lifetimes about our tradition. And now it's up to us to remember them and ensure that their legacy lives on beyond the span of their allotted years. Our opening hymn, probably my favorite in all of the hymnal, is a hymn of praise to these heroes of our tradition. And so I've taken my title from a line from that hymn, O blessed communion of the saints divine. I beseech their blessing as I attempt to speak a good word to the church in these difficult and anxious days. For we find ourselves on the eve of an important moment in our democracy. Normally, when I do these reflections on the nature of our faith and our politics, it kind of becomes a very heady affair. I like to talk about how Unitarian Universalism shares many overlapping values of American democracy, specifically our fifth principle. And as I considered doing something similar this time around, I reconsidered. Democracy doesn't feel like an essay in civics class anymore. It feels like a street fight. And I'm not advocating violence by any means, just reporting on the tension and anger that seems to be a part of our daily diet in America today. Division and enmity seem to go hand in hand. What hope can there be? Is there a way forward? Is there, as the psalmist writes, a balm in Gilead? I think it's in times like these that we turn to the saints among us and before us. On All Saints' Day, it got me thinking, who are the saints of our American democracy? Who is worthy of being lifted up and emulated? Whose life and legacy do we need to remember in this critical juncture? There are many such saints whom we're blessed to have in our American story, but sermons are only so long, so I've chosen 3 to consider this morning, and ironically, 2 of them are still alive. The first saint I want to lift up and talk about at some length is the Quaker teacher and writer who authored our reading this morning, Parker Palmer. Parker Palmer is one of those people that if Unitarians could just figure out how to claim him as one of our own, we would relish the chance. He sounds so much like one of us, but he is a Quaker to his bones. His book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, is my principal text this morning, and one I strongly recommend you pick up and read if you are at all anxious about the state of our republic. Interestingly, it was written well before the rise of Donald Trump, yet he seems to speak so eloquently about what it has been like these past 4 years. What has been true for far too long is the deep divisions we have seen in our political life, not just differences. For differences in and of themselves are not bad. It is acrimony and hatred of the other that seems to go along with those differences that is problematic. I remember back in 2003, there was a big conflict with the band the Dixie Chicks, now known simply as the Chicks. You might remember that when America had given Saddam Hussein a deadline to leave the country or else war would ensue, days before that was to occur, and the Iraq War did actually begin, the Dixie Chicks were performing in London. And the lead singer said that the band was ashamed to be from Texas because that was where President George W. Bush was from. Now, you may also recall that these were days in which criticism of the president was seen as just shy of treason in the minds of many. The result was that the Dixie Chicks were the first to be canceled, ironically, by the right. That's how poisonous our differences had become. It wasn't enough to disagree with a country music act on how to vote. Somehow, we as a nation got up in arms about this comment, which by today's standards, we probably wouldn't even bat an eyelash at now. Parker Palmer says that it's this anger and this hatred at people who believe different things than we do that has the potential to be a fatal blow for our democracy. Democratic institutions such as the legislature, the Supreme Court, checks and balances, and just downright decent treatment and decorum, to say nothing of consistent application of the rules for both parties, needs to be maintained. The whole point of, say, the Senate was to be as deliberative and thoughtful as possible on issues, to take one side, consider it fully, and then the other position, so that both sides of a matter were taken seriously. This basic charge to one of our most important governing bodies now sounds hopelessly naive. We live in these bubbles of the left and right. Without any cross-pollination, there is no accountability. And so the ideas of one side never truly encounter the ideas of the other apart from a shouting match. So the contest of ideas envisioned by the founders never occurs. Democratic institutions are meant to contain those differences and the tension that arises from them, Parker writes. And when they fail to work, then so does American democratic experiment. I suspect that some of the violence that we saw this summer around racial tensions in our society was a direct result of this failure of our democracy. As Parker Palmer points out, violence is what we get when we don't know what else to do with our suffering. How can we heal our country? That's both the central question of Parker Palmer's book and our theme for the month of November, healing. To get there, Palmer points us toward our second saint, President Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln, of course, presided over the most deeply bloody division in our nation's history. The South refused to participate in the American democratic institutions of the time in order to resolve the issue of slavery. And so they took their marbles and left, or so they wished to. The ensuing Civil War was not only incredibly divisive politically and geographically, but spiritually as well. Lincoln knew that it would not be enough to simply reassemble the Union into what it had been. We had to reconstruct the soul of America itself. And in order to do that, we had to reconstruct the souls of Americans all over the country, regardless of which side they fought for. He expressed this no more eloquently than in the second inaugural address, given, as Parker Palmer said, 1 month before he was shot. Some critics of the address at the time complained that it was really more sermon than political speech. Lincoln makes an important theological point in that address. He notes that both the North and the South pray to God for assistance, and neither side has received it fully. Perhaps, Lincoln suggests, this bloody Civil War is the price to be paid for all those years of slavery. Perhaps it isn't a matter of the North being morally superior to the South, that the South deserves it. We all deserve it, Lincoln says. Sadly, his assassination would prevent us from finding out how Lincoln would have handled the Reconstruction years. However, his vision for it was compelling. Punishing the loser is no way to heal. Healing comes when we help those who are in need. I remember one of my history professors joking once that if you want to thrive as a nation, lose a war to America. We helped rebuild Japan and Germany after World War II because we knew then, far better, I think, than we know now, that American democracy could be an example to the world if we dare to act out of compassion for others rather than solely out of power for ourselves. Now, the following quote is from the first inaugural address, but it demonstrates Lincoln's desire to heal the nation. These words were spoken just weeks before the Civil War broke out. Quote, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature." Sadly, history did not follow this beautiful vision then, but perhaps it could for us today. Which leads me to our final saint of American democracy, Willie Nelson. Now, as I mentioned, the church and I are not officially advocating for you to vote against all incumbents. It's more the spirit of things than the literal words of the lyrics that we want to consider. But basically, Willie Nelson is affirming, as both Lincoln and Palmer suggest, that we use our democratic institutions wisely. If you don't like how things are going, vote them out. Start the show all over again. He does not call for a revolution and certainly not violence. Yet at the same time, the anger is clear in the tone of the song. If you're feeling that way, if you're frustrated and angry, then channel that emotion towards something that is effective. The biggest gun we got is called the ballot box. In other words, that tension between contrasting ideas is best dealt with within the system. This was also Parker Palmer's point. The other thing I like about Willie Nelson's message that isn't in the other two saints is celebration. We will sing and dance and shout. I think the more we make voting and political participation in this dry, boring affair, the fewer people participate, which is counter to how the system is intended to work. There's an old bumper sticker that says, "I want no part of your revolution if there is no dancing." This can be a joyful process. Maybe it has to be a joyful process in order for us to counteract the nastiness that pervades this far too much of our political life. Maybe we don't have to let it invade everything else too. Maybe there can be things that we celebrate about our democracy so that election time is not a chore or a desperate clinging to life, but rather a joyful time of celebration. My friends, I don't know that you need me to tell you to go vote. I certainly can't and won't tell you who to vote for. I highly doubt that there are many of you out there kind of on the edge of one or the other, just waiting for my endorsement. But if I can tweak a line from scripture, let us serve our democracy with joy. Let us remember the prayer that the other Nelson shared with us, Rabbi Lev Mirowitz Nelson. May we become a society united, fulfilling the divine purpose with a whole heart. And as the psalmist sang, may there be shalom within your walls, peace in your strongholds. For the sake of my brothers and sisters and friends, I will speak peace to you. So this week, please vote. Try not to watch too much of the news. Regulate your viewing hours according to your internal stress level. It's okay to turn it off and watch the Great British Bake Off for an hour. I give you permission to do that. And while you don't have to like either Donald Trump or Joe Biden, we still have to live in this country together. And that means we need to find a way to love each other, no matter whom the other person votes for. We must listen again for the wing beats of those better angels of our nature, to find a way for them to be revealed to all who meet us in how we vote and live and love one another. On this All Saints' Day, may we remember the great heroes of our democracy and our Unitarian Universalist faith. May we remember them often and allow the inspiring lessons of their lives transform us. And may we be counted among the blessed saints divine when it is our turn to join that great cloud of witnesses, so that our children will remember our story with reverence and grace. I love you. Go in peace. Amen. I invite you